when Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was first caught, there was a question as to whether he was going to get Miranda warnings or not. Well, it turns out he didn't in the beginning. He was put under what is called a public safety exception. And at that point, actually, let me skip ahead to what that means, because this is actually from a decision in 1984, New York versus Quarles. And so what happened in that case is that we had a rapist who the cops had caught, and the victim was there and said he's got a gun, but the cops couldn't see his gun. He had a holster that was empty. And so they said, "Where's your gun?" before they read his Miranda rights to him. When that went to the Supreme Court said, look, if there's an immediate, imminent threat, you don't know where his gun is, yet you could ask him where the gun is. That doesn't affect his rights at all, right? And after you find the gun, then you can read him the Miranda warnings. Now, that was in the beginning. Now, of course, in the quote-unquote war on terror, it got stretched and stretched. Now, the people who stretched it, actually, in this case, was not the Bush administration. It was the Obama administration. I say that as if you should be surprised, but given their horrible record on civil liberties, that is actually not surprising. Now, it turns out the Department of Justice wrote a memo to the FBI back in 2010. The first part of it makes sense. They say agents should ask any and all questions that are reasonably prompted by an immediate concern for the safety of the public or the arresting agents. Well, that would fall under the public safety exception. But they're never going to leave well enough alone. So they also tell the FBI, quote, "There may be exceptional cases in which, although all relevant public safety questions have been asked, agents nonetheless conclude that continued unwarned interrogation is necessary to collect valuable and timely intelligence not related to any immediate threat, and that the government's interest in obtaining this intelligence outweighs the disadvantages of proceeding with unwarned interrogation." In other words, have at it, Hoss. We just took this public safety exception and just blew it up and said, just keep asking him questions. Miranda warnings, his rights, who cares? Now, there's no need for that extra step, but the Obama administration went that way. I think he should have been read the Miranda rights right away. Why? I don't want to lose any evidence. Look, we've seen this a million times. You read the Miranda warnings, it doesn't matter. When I was younger, I thought it would make a big difference, but we've seen that it actually doesn't matter. They tell you all the information anyway, right? If you're going to get the information out, you get it no matter what warnings you read them. I don't want to lose any of the evidence. My God, can you imagine he tells you the critical things like, oh, I did it, and here's how I did it, before he got the Miranda warnings, then you can't use it in court against him. It's so stupid if you ask me. But they used the public safety exception all the way to Monday morning on Dzhokhar, and then this morning finally they had a federal magistrate go in there and arraign him, and he has gotten the Miranda warnings now, and he will go through civilian process. Now, of course, that's where the Republicans get really angry. Now, Peter King says, oh, enemy combatant, enemy combatant. Now, luckily, Senator Feinstein's on the show with him and makes some decent points. Let's watch the two of them.
I want the intelligence so we can save American lives, and that can only be done, I believe, effectively if he's treated as enemy combatant and does not have access to a lawyer.
There is ample evidence, fingerprints, I understand, direct testimony from one of the people that had his legs blown off, that he recognized him. They admitted to the driver of the car that they hijacked, that they were the bombers. So I think there's going to be a great deal of evidence put together to be able to convict him, and it should likely be a death penalty case under federal law. I believe that the federal competence in doing this at this time is extraordinary.
Now, which way does the Obama administration go? Will they buckle then after Peter King and the Republicans tell him, you got to treat him like an enemy combatant? Well, if you were paying attention, I already kind of told you the answer. But nonetheless, here's Jay Carn.
He will not be treated as an enemy combatant. We will prosecute this terrorist through our civilian system of justice. Under U.S. law, United States citizens cannot be tried in military commissions.
Hey, will you look at that? That is the correct answer. Now, it's a classic Obama to say, hey, listen, I didn't give Miranda warnings right away. I did the public safety exception for like a weekend. And then, so conservatives don't be too angry with me. And then liberals, you don't be too angry with me because I'm not treating him as an enemy combatant. I'm putting him in a civilian system. Look, if you thought there was a bomb or a gun somewhere, do the public safety exception for as long as it takes, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, an hour, however long it takes to determine whether there are any other weapons around or any other bombs in the city. and then give him the Miranda warnings. That's the correct route. Now, Obama, of course, splits the baby to some degree. Now, here's the really interesting part. Washington Post poll. Now, should the government, in fact, here, let me read you the question, because the specifics of the question are very important. It's guarding you against terrorism versus the Constitution and protections afforded to us by that. Quote, which worries you more? That the government will not go far enough to investigate terrorism because of concerns about constitutional rights, or that it will go too far in compromising constitutional rights in order to investigate terrorism? And look at these great answers. Will not go far enough is 41, but will go too far. We're worried that the government will go too far and take away our constitutional rights in trying to fight terrorism is 48%. It wins. Oh, that's a great turn of events. Because for far too long, unfortunately, the assumption was the American people will say, no, take away our constitutional rights. That's okay. You're fighting terrorism. Terrorism, safety, security. But finally, it's flipped 48-41. Now, here's what's really interesting. Republicans, on that same question, 56-34, not in favor of safety from terrorism, but in favor of the U.S. Constitution and our rights. That is incredibly encouraging. Now, it might be partly because they hate Obama. Okay, but I'll take it. Okay, now Democrats, on the other hand, 48-43, they agree, but the margin is not as wide there. And unfortunately there, it's like, well, Obama wants to take away some of our rights, so I guess I'm in favor of that, and I'm against the Constitution, and I'm for safety, like Bush told me. So that's a little discouraging. But hey, listen, Obama listens to Republicans more than anyone else. So if more Republicans are now saying, hey, give a damn about the Constitution and not just the Second Amendment, well, that's a good sign, because he might actually pay attention to that.
Good sign, but let's keep it real. The numbers would be reversed if there was a Republican president in office. Republicans would be like, oh, no, it's fine if my Republican president takes away my rights. And Democrats would say, oh, hell no, that guy that I didn't vote for taking my rights? No, it's going to be a problem. It's all based on whose team you're on, because that's all we think about now.
The only problem with that statement is it's too correct. Okay, so it's hard to argue with. But at the same time, J.R., the only point I would make is I'm sensing, partly through the polls, partly through other articles I've read, a certain movement towards, hey, wait a minute, maybe the Constitution matters. Now, it's inching that way, and you're right, it's mainly team ball, and you can see that in the Republican and Democratic polling numbers. And also, Democrats are a little bit more likely to lean towards rights versus, fear-mongering. So that's why even under Obama, it's 48-43 saying, no, we care more about your constitutional rights. So under Obama, because of the Republican opposition, we're ironically in a slightly better place in terms of public opinion on giving a damn about the Constitution. Now, one last thing on this. There's the only way that you can call him an enemy combatant is if you do the National Defense Authorization Act. But listen to that act. The 2012 National Defense Authorization Act defines enemy combatant as a person who is a part of or substantially supported al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners. Now, the reality is, how do you know if this guy's connected to al-Qaeda or Taliban? We have no evidence of that whatsoever. So just to say, I don't know, the dude was Chechnyan, come on, and he came from Kyrgyzstan at some point, that's not good enough to say that that's definitely al-Qaeda, Taliban, or associated forces. And if he's an enemy combatant, who are we combating? Who are we at war with? Do we bomb Chechnya? Do we bomb Russia, where Tamerlan had gone back to? Do we roll our tanks into Moscow? Do we go to Dagestan, Kyrgyzstan? It makes no sense. Look, this kid was an American citizen, and it makes it a little scarier that he was. But he was, and you should try him as an American, and then bring the full weight of the law down on him.